Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories. Welcome back to So Here's My Story. I'm Jody.
I'm Elliot.
And if after today's episode, you want to be on the list to keep in touch with us and hear what's next, you can either go to the website at sohere'smystory.com and join our email list, or just go ahead and shoot us an email at talktous@sohere'smystory.com. And don't forget, you can also find out how to contact Elliot and I directly, also via the website, via our real world channels.
Yes, we do have real world.
The real world. The not so here's my story world. Thanks.
Okay. You ready to go?
I'm ready to go.
So here's our story. This is, I believe, episode 227.
Yes, that is correct.
This is also our final episode of So Here's My Story.
It is.
It is a run that we started in June of 2017.
That was our first published episode.
The first published episode, we actually began planning this when Barack Obama was still president. And I think the iPad was new.
True.
And the newfangled thing was the iPad. But we've told 226 stories and had great conversations and great feedback from our community. But we've decided that this is going to be the last for So Here's My Story. And I've been thinking about this a lot. I've been thinking about some of the things that we did. When I think about the podcast, in addition to our community, or I guess with our community, I think about your having to pry me out of a corner in our happy hour and made me talk to
other people
because I was in a really good conversation. Right. And you're like, no, you don't get to have just one conversation and just leave the room. And so that, and I think when we were talking about this, you had brought up the Stalking Face Cake.
Oh, right. Yes. I forgot about the Stalking Face Cake. That was when we the very first time we tried to do video, terrible lighting, bad camera, horrible positioning or whatever. And the still from the camera was you like creepily behind me with this, and you were just sort of staring, watching me do. So you had this like weird stalkery. I will find that picture and post it in the group.
I think you were trying to, we kept trying to make it better. So because we kept trying to compensate for all of those things, the bad camera, the bad lighting, the no plan whatsoever. And so we kept recording something and we're like, no. And you would go forward to the camera and stop it. So you would approach the camera and I'm looking intently at the camera and so I appear to be looking intently really at the back of your head.
At my jugular. Let's be specific. It looks like you're trying to gauge where and how would be best to kill me.
But so I'm looking intently. Let's just leave it at that. And you're approaching the camera with kind of this wide-eyed, where's the control? Where's the control? So you've got this evil thing. So we have that as the still. It looks like one of those things you see on BuzzFeed as final picture, right? We're at 13 last pictures of. And that looks like one of them. And then was it a birthday?
Yeah, it was our birthday that year. It was in 2017.
In 2017.
Go ahead and then I'll tell you the funny thing about why.
Yeah, we took it to, whether it was Grouse or someplace, and we turned that picture into a cake. Yes,
you got it made onto a cake, which I couldn't eat because I was in like the last 2 weeks of training for the strong woman competition. And I had to get in under my weight. So we held on to it for a while. But the funny thing about that was it was already a creepy picture, but when they however they screen print that on the cake, I don't know if you remember this, but all the contrasts were extra contrasty. And so like the dark circles, like it just took on this extra creepy, weird, like ominous sort of view. We both looked absolutely terrible, but that was a fun.
Yes. And so because you couldn't eat it, I proudly brought that home. And I remember both of my sons were looking at this like, what the hell?
Why does this
exist? Why does this
freeze
exist?
It for a while? You froze it, and then we were going to eat it together, and we never did.
Which only really enhanced the visual.
Actually, what I really have to put out about that is, and I think it's one of the funnier things about that I think you and I know about ourselves, but the fact that you went to all the trouble of making the cake, and then in retrospect, I'm like, one piece of cake wouldn't have killed me. I don't know why I was so like hyper focused, but we didn't do that. But then we froze it and then never got around to eating it. And the theme of like big plans with like a ... that we didn't finish through, also a theme of the story.
It is. It's a big theme. I told you that I judged a mock trial competition this weekend. So I was in my office, as I am now. And when we paused when we had questions at the end of the trial, we allowed the students to ask questions. One of them, when we got to the really informal session, one of the students looked and said, I just have to ask, is that a bowling pin over your shoulder?
Birthday bowling pin.
And I was like, yes, it is. And I didn't tell the story, but the bowling pin is another thing, because so Jody and I trade a bowling pin. It was a heartfelt present that Jody found at a thrift shop, was it?
It was a Goodwill. And I was specifically searching for the cheesiest, kitschiest thing that I could give you for your birthday. And not only did I find this bowling pin standing there, and it's a real bowling pin, like it's very heavy, it's weighted, it's like porcelain-y or whatever. Mm-hmm. But it actually says happy birthday on it. And it really did feel like this, like a moment of the gods. I'm like, I have to have this. I have to give this to Elliot. So we passed it back and forth.
Right.
Most years.
Right.
COVID got in the way one year.
And I have possession of it this year. And the first year when you gave it to me, I thought, oh, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go to one of these trophy places that makes trophy. And I'm going to get my big idea was to have like a plate on it. So I could say, Jody to Elliot, September 1st, whenever it was, and then whatever. And we could have the plates to show when we traded it back and forth. And they quoted me an ungodly amount of money. And they said that they couldn't possibly do it because if they screw into this, the whole thing is going to shatter. And
I feel like a life metaphor. I don't know.
Yes. And so I did have a big plan for that, and it did not work, but I proudly have the bowling pin over my shoulder.
Yes, you do.
So
not creepily either. So it's
not creepily, staring you down over my shoulder.
You mentioned, I just wanted to touch on some of my favorite like community moments. One of them was just the people that we started to meet, that I now consider friends, that I've had coffee with. Scott, I met Scott. And what's really funny is because Scott Athen is a lawyer, I assumed that you knew him previously, but that was not the case, as I understand. So I can't remember the story of how Scott found his way to us, but he's somebody that I've come to know well. And Benjamin, and there's just a bunch of people that I only know. Some of the people who started texting us, who I haven't had coffee with because they live far, far away, but people who've either joined the group or started texting us that I only was able to cross paths with because we were doing this. And that just, it seems like such a small thing because we cross paths with strangers all the time on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and whatnot. But for whatever reason, it just felt more meaningful to me, that some of the connections that we made and the stories that were shared, whether it was Michelle or Christine or Chris Mullet or Carol, people took the time to write up their experiences and share them in the group and talk about like their ongoing. And every single time it made me wish that it was an easier way that wouldn't be overwhelming, which is the other sort of filter there, to be hearing, for it to be this like giant conversation about these things that we sort of brought into the into the community space. And I just always appreciated that. But one of my favorite stories, and oh my gosh, I didn't look it up and I'm so bad with names. I'm not going to remember his name right off the top of my head. But there was a quote that that I say all the time that I can never remember. And I went to Google it, and because that's what I always have to do. And up came this thing that was a blog post someone had done about one of our episodes and quoted that quote. And I honestly did I kind of like shake off. I was like, alternate reality kind of moment. I'm like, that can't be. And I like blinked my eyes 3 or 4 times and I clicked through, and indeed it was a guy who's now in the Facebook group. And I'm so sorry that I can't think of your name right off the top of my head. Steven something, I think, who had written this post. And I was like, oh my gosh, someone wrote a post about an episode we did. And it was so lovely to know that we were meaningfully connecting with people, even people that we may never hear from. Because that's what I think the reason there's a lot of things we fell down on with big plans and ideas, but we never missed a show. We never missed recording or occasionally putting in a replay, but we never missed it. And for me, I think part of that was I enjoyed having an opportunity to have meaningful conversations about small things with someone on a regular basis. And I think that's a big part of what worked for the people who sort of joined our little circle.
Well, I think that it's, a lot of people have asked over the years whether it's scripted, whether we if you listen to a bunch of episodes, you're like, no, nobody can write that. But whether it's scripted, and one of the reasons that it's not is because we always wanted to have a real conversation. And often if we have something that we wanted to talk to each other about, we'd stop and we'd say, no, you know what, we have to hit the record, because we're not going to have the conversation and try and recreate the conversation. And part of that grew from decisions early on when we were planning the podcast. And at first we made a run at having certain guests. And we always would get solicited by people who wanted to be guests, and they wanted to talk about their books or talk about their particular point of view or their big idea or their TEDx or the business development and all that stuff. And we made a decision early on that if you like the podcast or if you don't like the podcast, that's fine. But that decision is going to be made based on who we really were and not on some sort of agenda to promote X, Y, or Z.
Right. Yep. No, yeah. I think that absolutely rings true right back to before we even actually published. And I think we've talked about this before. We hired that consultant lady who had an amazing resume. On paper, she knew a lot of things we didn't. And but it was just so clear that she wasn't our person, because everything she wanted us to change would have changed all the core reasons we were doing what we were doing. And I think it's one of those things, like so many things in life, if you can have the faith and trust to just stick with what's real for you, and either that will resonate with people and they will join, whatever, or it won't. And while that may not be exactly what you want, it's still truth. I guess that's the thing. It's real and it's true, and trusting that.
And what you wind up with, we have a community of people who, each one of whom we would love to be in a room with and have a conversation with and have coffee with. And we've talked about this a lot. If one of the consultants that I'm sure every one of our listeners gets solicited from about increasing their Twitter followers and their Facebook fans and their LinkedIn connections and their digital footprints. And so if one of them could truly do that and, almost overnight, say you have 200,000 more Twitter followers. Okay, but are those your people? And I think that we made the decision to ensure that if somebody likes our podcast, it's going to be because they're our people. They're the people that we want to be in a room with, we want to meet with, we want to hear from, we want to talk to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I was thinking, just because we record a week in advance. So I was thinking, and by I was thinking, I mean, it just occurred to me.
And also a week in advance. Sometimes we do recognize that Tom has made shoe top touches before to get us out on time.
That is true.
Try a week in advance. Yeah,
that is true. But what might be interesting is to just give everyone an opportunity to, and in the same way that we wanted to use this last episode to give some space for the ending, as opposed to just doing a final episode and then at the end being like, oh, by the way, that was our last episode, or just drifting off into space. What'd you say?
Goodbye.
It might be interesting just to, nothing fancy or that takes a lot of coordination because we won't do it, but maybe we'll do like a,
like a passive aggressive slam on us.
Exactly. Or it's just honest. I know our limitations. It's honest. I know our limitations. If we do like a Zoom, like we'll post it in the group and we do like an open Zoom call or something in a couple weeks, just so that everyone has an opportunity to kind of come on and wave and say goodbye. I'm saying that from my own little bit of grief and mourning for having a reason to. I mean, it's much like I said to you, like, I'm going to miss having a reason to talk to you every single week. Obviously, we can still have lunch or coffee, whatever, but we're not going to do that every week. I'm not going to call you every week to talk about stuff. And I will miss that, and that's okay.
Right. You're not? Why does that happen?
And I will miss having those opportunities to connect with the people that we connected to. And I think the important thing is like, and that's okay. I know we've talked before about that TED Talk that I saw years ago about, I think it was called another way to look at love or something. And she talked about if relationships were these, a collaborative work of art that you don't just paint on a canvas forever, that you decide each time, like, okay, that canvas is done. Do we pick? And sometimes you're like, okay, let's just pick up another canvas and keep going. But you don't just keep painting forever. And sometimes you say like, oh no, now's the time I'm going to paint on different canvases, or I'm going to do sculpture for a while. And it's so much of I don't know, it's just a healthier way, I think, to look at things instead of this just assumption. And I say this with being the exact same person who got very teary when you were talking just in the beginning just now. So both things are true at once, but I think there's something at risk if there's this assumption that keeping going is inherently better than ending a thing sometimes. And it doesn't have to even mean that the thing was bad or whatever. It's just like, no, things can have chapters, or canvases can have completions.
And I think that the scary part for me that really goes against my, I don't know, the way I'm kind of wired is it was hard to say, okay, you know what, I think this is the right time when we're talking about it to end this or to stop painting on this particular canvas. When I didn't have, okay, but first thing next week, we can start on ... whatever it is, because there is going to be another canvas or a sculpture or a project, or you don't stop your creativity and your need for an outlet and your need for connection just with one project. But it is the scary part, when you're saying, okay, this is ending, and there's an element of faith that I think I've learned in, I don't know when, but it certainly wasn't with me originally, to have faith that there's going to be something else that we find individually, or I hope together, that's magic, or that really captivates us and that captures who we are and what we want to put out in the world. But you have to have faith that that's going to be there at some point, without planning it and holding on to the previous project before you find it.
Yeah, 100%. It's the faith that that if you, I think there's an if attached to that though. It's the faith that if you follow the energetic whatever, like the energetic wave of things. Like if something is starting to feel not the way you want it to feel, like trusting that, and I'm sort of forming a thought as it's getting a little fuzzy here, but there's it probably ties back to the don't just assume keeping going is the best thing. Like if that thing is feeling like that canvas is ending or that chapter is kind of ending, that those two go hand in hand, I guess is just my point. It's that maybe you're talking about the faith in the next thing.
Yes, that there's a faith in the next thing.
In the next thing. But so I want to add to that a faith in the truth of how the current thing feels. Maybe that's where I was trying to go. Like the faith in that if it's not feeling quite right, that there is or that it's just, I wouldn't say the gum wasn't losing its flavor exactly, but just something wasn't quite the way it's, I don't know. We don't have to put words to it. That trusting that is meaningful and that it is useful and that it is guiding you somewhere. I guess I'm sort of backing up the starting point of faith to actually including your current experience. Because I usually think of faith as like a leaping thing, like a leap of faith. I think of faith in something futuristic or, trust in something, but it's sort of trusting the truth in what is here in the moment.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know. It's interesting. I see a little bit of a division between faith and trust, even though I recognize how much overlap they have. The faith that I'm talking about is that there will be something in the future, that this isn't an end, that there will be something in the future that really represents, who we are, that we decide that we're going to put out in the world. The trust is trusting that we can look at a thing, whether it's So Here's My Story or something else, and say, okay, what I'm feeling is a real thing. It's not to be dismissed. It's not to be taken lightly. It's something to be examined and looked at from all angles. And if it holds up, it's something on which to take some action and to make a decision. And so I think both of those go hand in hand. That there's a trust that and there's also a feeling of validation that you have the right to look at what you're doing and make changes. That I tell my students that it's a tired metaphor, but I want them to consider that they are the captain of any ship they board, and they have the right to take the wheel even if the current seems to be pulling them in a different direction. Mm-hmm. Because the current will always pull you, and sometimes it's where you want to go, but you have the right to decide not.
Yeah, I know. I think that's incredibly important. And it's such a nuanced balance when we think about leadership and partnership of all kinds, that you trusting that truth of what feels real to you. And then you it's not like you ignore how other people are impacted or what they want and need. I mean, especially if you're leading a group of people, you have to be thinking about those things. But that I just think there's countless nuances in that it can't just be like, if you're feeling that way, you could say, I mean, I could write a story where you're like, oh, I'm not really loving this, but Jody will be so upset if we do that. Or if it was me, like, oh, but if I do that, Elliot he'll be mad at me. You can make up those narratives. And the point isn't that those made up narratives might not be true. It doesn't matter whether they're true or not. But I don't quite mean that, it's a thing I'm stumbling around a lot here, because it's a thing that I am playing with a lot in my own brain in different ways, of that the truth around your experience of a thing is what it is. And even if it doesn't match up with somebody else's thing. And then where you go from there as two people who are trying to be good to each other is where I think the real nuance comes in. I'm sorry.
No, I think that's true. And the other part of it is certainly that you have to examine not just, it's like the Wayne Gretzky quote, you have to move to where the puck is going. So that, for example, I got a call this morning from this person who said, look, I love what I'm doing right now, but I need to plan for 3 or 4 years when it's time for me to leave. And I want to turn this over to other people in my organization. Can you help me do that? And so what she was saying was that she needs to make sure that she's prepared to move to where the puck is going. And she trusts herself enough to look at this and say, there's going to be a time when I'm going to step back, look at the canvas, and deem it complete, at least for me. And I asked her the question of what then, and she said, I don't know.
Yeah.
And so, but she does trust that there is something. And it's those things that I think encompass certainly where I am right now. I'm really happy that we've done this, and I've taken so much, and I've learned so much from our conversations, from you. And frankly, it's been almost like a weekly therapy session for me, because, there are certain things I come here and I'm like, I'm really upset about this, or I'm really upset about that. And so we kind of wind up talking through it, and it's taught me a lot. And it's very difficult, I think, for me personally, to step back, look at the canvas, and deem it complete. But I think that's where we are.
No, we are. And I'm totally going to I can't even pretend to not get emotional now. So, and I appreciate that, because what's really interesting, and I think this is part of that faith as we wrap up here, is I was really sad when you said, I think we need to just pause it. Like, and so I had all those feelings, but then, what an interesting thing happened over the next few days from once we made that decision. I felt all this like sloughing off or something. I was like, oh, now I can because before I was like doing all this marketing work strategy for my specific business, but then I was like trying to also think about marketing the podcast and all, so we have these extra swim lanes, and all of a sudden that swim lane was free. And it was really interesting how freeing it, how it actually felt good. And I was surprised by that. Like, I didn't see that coming. I was like, oh, isn't that interesting? And so I appreciate you having the awareness and the, you starting that conversation. And that's the thing, like someone's initial reaction isn't always going to be their reaction. Sometimes things have to burn off a little bit before you get to like the truth of a thing.
And I'll tell you, in starting the conversation, the big obstacle for me was that I didn't want to lose the things that I am far from done with. Meaning, we talk every week, and I didn't want to go back to how we were in 2014, which is every couple months I'm like, hey, I talked to Jody in a while. I wonder what she's up to.
Yeah.
I didn't want to go back to that. And I also didn't want to get you upset and, all this stuff. And at the same time, what I did have to trust was that we could have a conversation.
Yeah.
And that it would be played out for a while, and we both get to process what this looks like and how it works. And that the things that we don't want to come to an end, don't come to an end.
It reminds me, this is going to sound like a wild tangent, but it's actually really related, is thanks to my crazy TikTok rabbit holes that we've been on a lot of very long drives lately. And so anyway, there's this whole thing about something called relationship anarchy. And like so many things in the world, like I love to get like pieces of wisdom from whether it's parenting or exercise or whatever. And so relationship anarchy is this concept, and it's really used in like the heavily in like the polyamory world and whatnot, but it's taking all these pieces, breaking up the thing that was a mass, like a cohesive ball of a thing of a relationship. And it's breaking it down into all the pieces of like the person that I live with, that I cohabitate with, whom I'm financially tied with, who I do like not business, but like investing in the future, raising kids. And then it's breaking down like entertainment versus sex versus, more kinky, like whatever. It's taking it and it's teasing out all the different threads of the fabric so that you can look at all the threads individually and say like, okay, which things do I need this relationship to give me and which I don't? And that what I loved about it was it's taking something that people usually just kind of all glom together and looking at it in this very different way. And I think, but you were just saying the same thing. Like if it felt like to be able for us to talk regularly, you had to keep it in this conglomerated ball of, well, because we do the podcast. It's like, no, actually, let's like break it all out and say like, well, there's the podcast and there's us talking regularly, whether or not it's every week, but, just like regularly. So what pieces are important to us and what pieces are less important to us than they used to be? And what other things are maybe more important to us than they used to be? And over and over again, I feel like when you can break down any issue into its independent variables, you have the capacity to get closer to the actual truth of the thing. And you're not accidentally taking on weight that doesn't need to be tied to that truth. And then you can form a next canvas or a next chapter based on those things that you actually definitely want and not the things that aren't as useful anymore.
Right. And so you look at what pieces can give way for recreation.
What's really funny is I just realized this. We keep using this metaphor of like chapters. We were also talking about canvases, but like different chapters. And that's what we've done. Like stories don't go on forever and ever and ever and ever and ever.
Right. So with that, we would like to say so long, not goodbye, but so long to the people who have joined us, whether it was for one episode, hopefully more than just this episode. One episode.
So thanks for coming. Bye-bye.
Thanks for coming. Bye. Or for, 4+ years. We have really deeply loved the opportunity to be part of your world and part of your conversation and take up space in your head for a while, and we'll miss it. But
Absolutely.
There's, we'll see what's going to happen.
We'll see. Who knows? Maybe we'll do something else another time. We don't know.
But for right now, that's our story.
So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories.
You
can find links to that group as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best
Lovingly
of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us. Which is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.